The dust never settled on Kepler 442b, and Helen Carter had learned to live with it, coating everything she touched. 3 years she had been digging in this orange dirt under an alien sun, and 3 years the Galactic Archaeological Consortium had been telling her to give up. The other researchers were already packing their equipment into shipping containers, and the alien supervisors had stopped pretending to be interested in the daily reports. Helen stood at the edge of the pit, watching her small team work below, and she knew this was probably their last chance. The Vryn expedition leader approached her with slow, careful steps, and his crystalline body caught the light in ways that still amazed her even after all this time. He was about to deliver bad news, and Helen could tell from the way his faceted surface dimmed slightly. The consortium has voted to end operations here, he said, and his voice came through her translator as a soft chime. We have found nothing of value, and the resources would be better spent elsewhere. Helen wanted to argue, but she had learned that arguing with the Vryn rarely changed anything. They made decisions based on pure logic, and emotion just bounced off them like light off their crystal skin. Give me 3 more days, she said instead. There is an anomaly in the geological surveys just 3 meters down, and it could be important. The Vryn seemed to consider this, and Helen held her breath. 2 days, he said finally, and that is only because you found the initial site markers. Do not waste this opportunity. Helen gathered her team that night in the small prefab shelter they called home. Danny Price was young and eager and still excited about being on an alien world. Lisa Morgan was older and more experienced, and she had worked on dig sites across 3 star systems. They were the only other humans on Kepler 442b, and Helen trusted them completely. We have 2 days, she told them, and they nodded without complaint. They had known this was coming, and they were ready. The alien crews had given up, but humans had a reputation in the galactic community for being stubborn to the point of stupidity. Helen preferred to think of it as determined. They worked through the night using hand tools because the scanning equipment kept giving false readings. The other species thought this was primitive, but Helen had learned that sometimes old methods worked best. Machines could destroy what careful hands might preserve, and the predecessors had built things that were more delicate than they appeared. The predecessors were the galaxy's greatest mystery, and every civilization that reached the stars eventually started looking for them. They had vanished 50,000 years ago, leaving behind only fragments and ruins that raised more questions than they answered. Some thought they had transcended physical form. Others believed they had been destroyed by war or plague. Helen just wanted to find something that proved they had existed at all. On the second day, Danny's scanner started making a sound none of them had heard before. The readings showed something dense and complex buried at exactly 2.7 meters. Helen felt her heart race, but she forced herself to move slowly. They brushed away the compressed sediment, layer by layer, and the artifact emerged like something being born. It was a sphere about 1/2 meter across and made of material that seemed to shift between metal and stone. The surface was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could see. Helen reached out to touch it, but Lisa caught her wrist. We should scan it first, Lisa said, and Helen nodded reluctantly. The scans showed nothing useful, and the sphere sat there beautiful and incomprehensible while they argued about what to do next. Then word spread through the camp, and within hours the dig site was crowded with alien researchers who had suddenly found their interest again. The Vryn leader arrived with analysis equipment. The Kathrani Collective sent their quantum specialists. The Orzath Empire sent a warship just in case. They ran every test known to galactic science, and the artifact responded to none of them. It just sat there inert and silent while the greatest minds in the galaxy poked and prodded and argued. Some said it was a weapon. Others insisted it was a database. The Kathrani thought it might revolutionize faster than light travel. Everyone had theories, but nobody had answers. Helen watched them all and said nothing. She had learned that humans saw things differently than other species. Where the aliens tried to fit the artifact into their existing knowledge, Helen just observed. She noticed how the patterns seemed to flow when light hit them at certain angles. She saw how the material felt warm even though it should have been cold. She watched and waited and wondered. On the 7th day, the galactic powers decided to transport the artifact to a research facility in the core worlds. The Vryn leader gave Helen permission to examine it one final time, as a courtesy to the human who had found it. The observation dome was cleared, and Helen approached the sphere alone. Her team watched from behind the protective barrier. and she could feel their concern. She knelt beside the artifact and did something that would have horrified the safety-conscious aliens. She removed her glove and placed her bare hand on its surface. The sphere was warm beneath her palm, and the geometric patterns seemed to shift and flow under her touch. For just a moment she felt something impossible: recognition. The artifact pulsed once with soft golden light and then went dark again. But Helen had felt it reach out to her like something waking from a long sleep. It had touched her mind with questions she could not quite understand, and she had touched it back with answers she did not know she had. The connection lasted only a heartbeat, but it changed everything. She pulled her hand back and stood up, trying to keep her expression neutral. The alien researchers rushed in asking questions and running new scans, but the artifact showed nothing different. Helen reported that it remained inert, and they seemed satisfied with that answer. But as she walked away, she could feel the artifact's attention following her, patient and waiting, like something that had all the time in the universe. That night, Helen lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The artifact had recognized something in her, and she had no idea what that meant. The predecessors had vanished thousands of years before humans had even learned to make fire. There should be no connection between an ancient alien civilization and a species that had only reached the stars 20 years ago. But the artifact knew her, and she knew it, and that simple, impossible fact was about to change the galaxy forever. The GSV Concordance was the largest research vessel Helen had ever seen, and it made her feel very small. The ship belonged to the galactic community and was crewed by 40 different species, all working together in careful harmony. Helen had been granted passage as the discoverer of the artifact, but she knew it was more courtesy than respect. The aliens still thought humans were too young and too reckless to understand what they had found. The journey to the galactic capital would take 3 weeks, even with the advanced hyperdrive engines. Helen spent most of her time in the observation bay, watching the artifact through layers of containment fields and reinforced transparent aluminum. The galactic researchers had turned it into a science experiment, measuring every tiny fluctuation and treating it like a bomb that might explode at any moment. Lieutenant Jake Morrison found her there on the 4th day, and he was the only other human aboard the massive ship. He was military liaison assigned to protect human interests, though Helen suspected he was also there to keep an eye on her. The galactic powers were nervous about what the artifact meant, and nervous people made poor decisions. "You look tired," Jake said as he sat down beside her. Helen did not take her eyes off the sphere. "I keep thinking about when I touched it," she said. "There was something there, Jake, and it felt like recognition." He was quiet for a moment before responding. "The scans showed nothing," he said. "Maybe the scans are looking for the wrong things," Helen replied. Before Jake could answer, alarms screamed through the ship. The containment field around the artifact flickered, and the readings spiked into impossible ranges. Scientists rushed into the observation bay, and their various appendages flew over control panels while voices shouted in a dozen different languages. The Vryn sealed the bay doors, trapping everyone inside as a safety measure. The artifact began to glow. It started as faint light, barely visible, but it quickly grew brighter and more intense. The light seemed to exist outside normal colors, as if it came from somewhere human eyes were not meant to see. The Kathrani analysts shouted warnings about dimensional fractures. The Vryn activated emergency protocols, and Helen just stood there watching as the artifact woke up. Then it spoke. Not with sound exactly, but with pure information flooding into every mind in the room. Most of the aliens collapsed immediately, and their neural structures could not handle the volume of data. Helen felt it crash over her like a wave trying to sweep her consciousness away. But within that overwhelming flood, she found something unexpected. Language. Not any language she knew, but one that felt familiar in ways she could not explain. Her mind grabbed at the patterns and found structure and rules and meaning. As she began to understand, the flood of information slowed and focused and became something she could almost process. The artifact was searching for something. It had been asleep for thousands of years, and now it was awake and confused and reaching out blindly for a connection it expected to find. Helen did the only thing that made sense. She stepped forward past the groaning aliens and past the flickering containment field that had already failed. She placed both hands on the artifact's warm surface. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. Helen saw galaxies being born and stars dying and civilizations rising and falling like waves on an endless ocean. She saw the predecessors not as mysterious ancients, but as people. Real people with hopes and fears facing a crisis that threatened everything they had built. She saw what they had done to stop it. The artifact pulsed in her hands and she felt its confusion deepen. It showed her images of its creators and Helen's breath caught in her throat. They looked human. Not exactly the same, but close enough that they could walk down any street on Earth without causing alarm. Bipedal with 2 arms and 2 legs and forward-facing eyes. The basic template was unmistakable. The artifact scanned her, diving deep into her genetic code and her neural patterns and the very essence of what made her human. She felt it comparing her to ancient templates stored in its memory. She felt it measuring the differences and calculating probabilities. And then she felt something that might have been wonder if a machine could feel such things. Close enough, it seemed to decide. After 50,000 years alone, close enough would have to do. The light faded and the artifact went quiet. Helen found herself on her knees with Jake's hand steadying her shoulders. Around her, the alien scientists were slowly regaining consciousness and they all looked shaken. The Vryn leader approached on unsteady legs and his crystalline body was still vibrating with shock. "What happened?" he demanded. "What did you do?" Helen looked up at him and then at the artifact, which now glowed with a soft, steady light that had not been there before. "I think it recognized me," she said quietly. "Or it recognized something in me." The Vryn's faceted eyes widened. "That is impossible," he said. "The predecessors vanished tens of thousands of years before humanity even existed." "I know," Helen said, "but I saw them and they looked like us." The implications rippled through the observation bay like shockwaves. The Kathrani began speaking rapidly among themselves in their quantum-linked language. The Shen retreated into silence and their multidimensional forms flickered with distress. Even Jake was staring at her with something between awe and fear. Because if the predecessors looked like humans, then everything the galactic community thought they knew about human origins was wrong. If there was a connection between Earth's youngest species and the galaxy's oldest mystery, then humanity was not what everyone assumed. They were not newcomers stumbling into a galaxy run by older, wiser civilizations. They were something else entirely. The Concordance changed course immediately and diverted to the nearest secure facility. It was a research station orbiting a dead star in a system nobody visited. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, and Helen found herself at the center of a political storm. Every major power wanted control of the artifact, and every major power was suddenly very interested in humanity's origins. Helen spent the next 2 days being interviewed and tested and questioned by experts from a dozen species. They scanned her brain and analyzed her genetics and tried to understand what made her special. Why had the artifact responded to her and not to them? What did she have that they lacked? She could not give them answers because she did not have answers. All she knew was that when she touched the artifact, something ancient had recognized something in her blood. Some genetic marker or neural pattern that matched templates stored 50,000 years ago. The predecessors had looked human, and the artifact had accepted her as close enough to its makers. That simple fact terrified the galactic community, because it meant humanity was not what they thought. And if humans were descended from the predecessors, then they were not guests in the galaxy. They were heirs to the oldest legacy anyone had ever found. The question was what that legacy meant and whether humanity was ready to claim it. Helen did not know the answer, but she knew they were about to find out. The artifact had woken up and it had chosen her, and now there was no going back. The galaxy was about to change, and Helen Carter was standing at the center of that change, whether she wanted to be or not. The research station orbiting the dead star was built for moments like this, and Helen had never seen so many alien species gathered in one place. The main auditorium was enormous, with sections designed for hundreds of different environmental needs. The human section was small and tucked into a corner as if someone had added it as an afterthought. Helen sat there with Jake beside her and felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching her every move. The Kathrani collective spoke first, and their quantum-linked minds presented arguments with perfect unity. The artifact must be secured by those with experience and wisdom, they said. Humanity has been part of the galactic community for barely 2 decades, and they lack the knowledge and technology to understand what they have found. The artifact is too important and too dangerous to leave in inexperienced hands. The Vryn agreed, though they were more diplomatic about it. The Orzath Empire demanded custody because they thought it might be a weapon. The Shen remained silent, but their presence alone said enough. They rarely involved themselves in politics unless something truly significant was happening. Then Ambassador Claire Hughes stood to speak for humanity. She was a veteran diplomat who had negotiated Earth's entry into the galactic community, and she had faced down alien bureaucracy for years. The artifact responded to Dr. Carter, she said calmly. Not to Kathrani technology or Vryn wisdom or any other approach. It responded to a human touch, and that should mean something. A voice, perhaps, the Kathrani replied. But not control and certainly not ownership. The artifact is too valuable to be left with a species still learning basic physics. Helen felt Jake tense beside her, but she put a hand on his arm. Getting angry would not help their case. Helen stood and requested permission to speak. The council fell silent because it was unusual for a scientist to address the full assembly. But her role as discoverer granted her certain rights. I understand your concerns, she began. Humanity is young and we make mistakes and we have much to learn. But you need to know what really happened on the Concordance. She activated the holographic display and showed images of the predecessors she had seen during her connection with the artifact. The images were hazy, because they had been filtered through her imperfect memory, but they were clear enough. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Impossible, the Kathrani declared. Convergent evolution cannot account for such similarity. It is not convergent evolution, Helen said quietly, and the room fell silent again. The artifact showed me more than images. It showed me data and genetic patterns and archaeological evidence from a dozen different worlds. The predecessors did not just look like humans. They were human. She let that statement hang in the air before continuing. 50,000 years ago, the predecessors faced a crisis, she said. The details are unclear, but it involved a threat to reality itself. They developed technology beyond anything we have now, and they used it to do something desperate. Something that might have saved the galaxy but cost them everything. The Shen spoke for the first time, and their voice resonated across dimensions. They seated themselves, the Shen said. They scattered their essence across space and time, hoping fragments would survive. Helen nodded. Earth was one of those seeds, she said. Humanity is not just similar to the predecessors. We are their descendants, separated by 50,000 years, and whatever catastrophe forced them to such desperate measures. The implications crashed over the assembly like a physical force. If humanity descended from the predecessors, then they were not newcomers at all. They were the inheritors of the galaxy's oldest legacy, returned after millennia of absence. The political calculations were already happening, and Helen could see it in the way the different species looked at each other. The Orzath representative rose, and his armored form was imposing even among the diverse crowd. If this is true, he said, then the artifact belongs to humanity by right of inheritance. The Kathrani protested immediately. Knowing their heritage does not grant them wisdom, they said. They are still children playing with forces they cannot comprehend. Ambassador Claire saw her opening. Perhaps, she said smoothly, but it does grant them the right to learn. We propose a joint research effort with human scientists working alongside galactic experts. The artifact responded to Dr. Carter, so let us explore what that means together. Pool our knowledge and resources and find answers as pay. Partners. It was a reasonable compromise, and after hours of debate, the council agreed. But Helen could see the fear in their eyes. They would cooperate for now, but they were also preparing for the possibility that humanity might become something they could not control. The galaxy's power structure had just shifted, and nobody knew what that would mean. That night, Helen could not sleep, and she returned to the observation chamber where the artifact was kept. Security had been increased, but her clearance still granted access. She stood before the sphere, which pulsed gently with its steady golden light. What did your creators face, she whispered. What was so terrible that they scattered themselves across time and space rather than fight it directly? The artifact pulsed, and for a moment Helen felt something vast and cold. A presence that existed outside normal reality, watching and waiting. The predecessors had not defeated it, she realized. They had only delayed it, and if they could not stop it with all their knowledge and power, what chance did humanity have? The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt something else. Determination maybe, or stubbornness, or that peculiar human refusal to accept the impossible. Her ancestors had faced the end of everything, and they had found a way to survive. They had scattered themselves across the stars and waited for their children to grow strong enough to finish what they started. Helen placed her hand on the artifact again and felt its warmth. We will find a way, she told it silently. That is what humans do. We face impossible odds and we find ways to survive. Your creators gave us that gift along with their genetics. They gave us the stubborn refusal to give up even when logic says we should. The artifact pulsed brighter for a moment as if acknowledging her words. Then it settled back into its steady rhythm and Helen knew it was waiting. It had waited 50,000 years already and it could wait a little longer. But now it was not waiting alone. Humanity had returned and the galaxy would never be the same. The predecessors had left their legacy in human DNA and in artifacts scattered across the stars. Now it was up to their distant children to understand that legacy and to face whatever threat had forced such desperate measures. Helen did not know if they would succeed, but she knew they would try, and sometimes trying was enough. The Joint Research Facility was built in record time on a moon orbiting a gas giant in neutral space. Helen had never seen the galactic community work so efficiently, and it showed what they could accomplish when properly motivated. The facility housed scientists from a dozen species all focused on understanding the artifact and its connection to humanity. Helen led the human team of 20 scientists chosen for their expertise and their ability to work with aliens. Dr. Peter Hayes was a geneticist who had studied human evolution since before first contact. Dr. Linda Cruz was a physicist whose theories about quantum consciousness had been considered crazy until the artifact proved them right. Together with specialists in archaeology and linguistics and computer science, they formed humanity's best hope of understanding their legacy. They had been working for 6 weeks and making progress slowly but steadily. The artifact responded to human touch every time, and it generated displays of information that seemed to mix historical records with technical manuals. The problem was decoding information that required both human intuition and alien analytical power to understand. It is like it was designed for cooperation, Linda explained during a briefing. Humans grasp the emotional context and the reasons behind the predecessor's actions, but we need the Kathrani's quantum processing to understand technical specifications and the Vrin's pattern recognition to decode the symbolic language. No single species can do this alone. Peter pulled up genetic analysis on the display. The more we study human DNA, the more questions we find, he said. There are sequences that do not fit normal evolutionary patterns, markers that appear deliberately engineered and dormant until specific conditions activate them. Jake leaned forward from his position by the door. What kind of conditions, he asked. We are not entirely sure, Peter admitted, but the artifact seems to trigger them. Dr. Carter's brain scans show increased activity in regions that are normally dormant. And it is not just her. Every human who touches the artifact shows similar changes. Helen had noticed the changes herself. Her dreams were vivid now and filled with images of places she had never been. She looked at the artifact's displays and understood them at levels beyond conscious thought. Something buried in her genetic memory was waking up. The breakthrough came on day 47 when Linda proposed a radical theory. What if the artifact is not just storing information, she said. What if it is a key to something much larger? She had noticed energy patterns that matched stellar phenomena, as if the artifact connected to a network spanning the entire galaxy. What if the predecessors built a galaxy-wide system? Linda continued. Nodes of technology connected at quantum levels, and this sphere is just one access point. They tested her theory using the artifact to search for matching energy signatures across known space. The results were staggering. Hundreds of sites scattered throughout the galaxy, all resonating with the same frequency. Most were in unexplored regions, but some were on worlds with current civilizations, including Earth. Helen stared at the display and her mind raced. There is a node on Earth, she said. Where exactly? Peter overlaid geological data and pointed to Antarctica, deep under the ice in a region that has been stable for millions of years. If there is a predecessor installation there, it has been hidden since long before modern humans evolved. The implications made Helen's breath catch. If active predecessor technology existed on Earth, it might have influenced human development all along. Subtle guidance over thousands of years pushing humanity's evolution toward some predetermined goal. They had to go to Earth and find that installation and understand what it had been doing. The Galactic Council was nervous about the idea. Predecessor technology secretly influencing humanity made them uncomfortable, but they could not deny the evidence and eventually authorized an expedition. Helen and Linda and Peter would lead the human team. Jake would handle security, and observers from major galactic powers would come along to ensure nothing upset the careful balance of power. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks, and Helen spent the time Studying the artifact which had been brought along, each day her connection grew stronger and more intuitive. She sensed its anticipation as if it was eager to return home after being away for so long. They landed at a research base in Antarctica, where drilling equipment waited. The ice at the target location was 3 kilometers thick, but Vrin thermal borers and Kathrani molecular destabilizers cut through in just 5 days. The installation was exactly where the artifact indicated. A massive complex carved from bedrock and shielded by technology that had hidden it from every survey Earth had ever conducted. Helen was first to enter with the artifact held carefully in her hands. As she crossed the threshold, lights activated throughout the complex, illuminating walls, covered in geometric patterns identical to those on the artifact. The installation recognized her, or recognized something in her, and welcomed her home. At the heart of the complex, they found what Linda had theorized. A node identical in design to the artifact, but massive and the size of a building. It pulsed with power connected to hundreds of other nodes across the galaxy through quantum entanglement that transcended normal physics, and around it in perfect stasis were 12 bodies. They looked exactly as Helen had seen in her visions. Human, but not quite. Taller, with features refined by either genetic engineering or millions of years of evolution. They wore clothing made of material that shifted between states, and their expressions were peaceful, as if merely sleeping. "Are they alive?" Peter whispered, and his scanner trembled. The readings were impossible. The predecessors existed in a state beyond death, but not quite life. Their consciousness was stored in the node waiting. And now that the node had activated by Helen's presence, those stored minds were beginning to wake. The installation hummed with power. The node's displays lit up with information flowing too fast to follow. The artifact in Helen's hands grew warm and pulsed in rhythm, with the larger node like synchronized heartbeats across thousands of years. One of the predecessors opened its eyes. Helen found herself staring into a gaze that held 50,000 years of memory. The being sat up slowly, as if remembering how to inhabit physical form after an eternity as pure consciousness. It looked at Helen and then at the others, and she saw recognition and confusion, and something that might have been hope. The predecessor did not speak with its mouth, but directly into their minds. How long, it asked, and those 2 words carried the weight of ages. Helen stepped forward while her colleagues stood frozen. 50,000 and years, she said. "You have been dormant since the crisis." The predecessor's expression shifted through emotions that seemed almost human. "Then we succeeded," it said. "The sacrifice was not in vain." Around it, the other predecessors began to wake. 12 minds returning to 12 bodies. 12 fragments of a civilization that had chosen sleep over death, to wait for a time when the galaxy might be ready. The one who woke first turned its full attention to Helen. "You are of the line," it said. "Distant and diluted, but genuine. Earth's children have grown well." Helen felt tears on her cheeks, though she had not realized she was crying. "We have so many questions," she said, "about who you were and what happened and why you left." "And we will answer," the predecessor replied. "But first you must understand what we faced and what is coming again." The predecessor's eyes held depths that made Helen feel like she was looking into an ocean of time itself. The being moved with grace that came from remembering how to exist in physical form after countless years as pure thought. Around it, the other 11 predecessors stirred and sat up, and looked around at a world that had changed beyond recognition since they had closed their eyes. The first predecessor spoke again, and its voice resonated in Helen's mind with clarity that needed no translation. "We are the last of our kind," it said, "the final guardians who chose to wait rather than fade into nothing. We hoped that someday our children would return, and it seems that hope was not misplaced." The other predecessors were fully awake now, and they gathered around their leader with movements that spoke of long familiarity. Helen found her voice, though it trembled. "What happened to your civilization?" she asked. "What could destroy something so advanced that even now we cannot match your technology?" The predecessor's expression grew somber, and it gestured toward the node. The installation responded by projecting images into the air above them. Holograms so real they seemed solid, showing a galaxy as it had been 50,000 years ago. The predecessors at their height were masters of 1,000 worlds. Their ships moved faster than light, and their cities touched the stars. They had solved problems of energy and disease and scarcity. They thought themselves immune to disaster, because they had conquered every challenge they faced. But they were wrong. The hologram shifted to show something that made Helen's stomach clench with instinctive fear. A flaw in reality itself, like a crack in glass spreading slowly through the fabric of space and time. Where it touched, matter ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Stars winked out and planets dissolved, and the very laws of physics began to unravel. We discovered it too late, the predecessor said. By the time we understood what was happening, the flaw had spread across a dozen sectors. We threw everything we had at the problem. Our greatest minds worked for decades seeking a solution. And we found one, but the price was terrible. The hologram showed the network of nodes like the one they stood beside. Massive installations built across the galaxy and connected through quantum entanglement that existed outside normal space. We built the network to stabilize reality at a fundamental level, the predecessor explained. Each node acts as an anchor point holding the fabric of space and time together, but the network required power beyond any conventional source. Consciousness, Linda breathed beside Helen. You used your own minds as a power source. The predecessor nodded slowly. We transferred ourselves into the network, it said. Billions of us giving up physical form to become living batteries sustaining the stabilization field. Most of us faded within the first 1,000 years. Only we 12 remained as overseers maintaining the system and waiting. Peter stepped forward with his scanner forgotten in his hand. But why seed new worlds, he asked. Why create humanity and the other descendant species? The predecessor's expression softened into something like sadness mixed with hope. Because we knew we could not sustain it forever, it said. The network was a temporary solution to buy time. We scattered genetic templates across the galaxy, hoping new species would evolve. Species that might one day understand what we did and find a better way. Earth was your most successful experiment, Helen said quietly. The predecessor met her eyes. Not an experiment, it said gently, a gift. We gave you the capacity for curiosity and creativity, and that peculiar stubbornness that refuses to accept impossible odds. We gave you genetic markers that would let you interface with our technology when you were ready, and we waited to see if you would grow strong enough to finish what we started. Jake spoke from where he stood by the entrance. You said the network is failing. The predecessor's expression grew grave. The stabilization field weakens every year, it said. In perhaps 1,000 years, perhaps less, the flaw will return. Unless someone takes our place in the network or finds a way to repair reality permanently. The weight of those words settled over everyone like a physical burden. The predecessors had bought the galaxy 50,000 years, but they had only delayed the inevitable. Now they were passing that burden to their descendants, to humanity and its galactic neighbors. You expect us to sacrifice ourselves like you did, Helen said, and she could not keep the bitterness from her voice. The predecessor shook its head firmly. No, it said. We expect you to find what we could not. A permanent solution. We were brilliant, but we were also desperate. We took the first answer we found, not the best one. You have time and resources and the knowledge of a dozen species working together. Find what we could not. Fix what we only patched. The artifact in Helen's hands pulsed warmly and understanding flooded through her. It was not just a key or a database. It was a teaching tool designed to help humanity develop the knowledge needed to solve the crisis permanently. The predecessors had left everything they knew encoded in artifacts, scattered across the galaxy. A legacy waiting for their children to claim it. Over the following weeks, the installation became a center of cooperation, unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The predecessors shared their knowledge freely, but they refused to simply hand over solutions. They insisted that humanity and its neighbors earn their understanding and prove they could work together. Only cooperation would be enough to face what was coming. Helen found herself translating between predecessor concepts and current galactic understanding. Her connection to the artifact had changed her at a fundamental level, activating genetic potential that had lain dormant for millennia. She interfaced with their technology intuitively and understood their mathematics in ways that took others years of study. But she was not alone. Danny from the original dig could manipulate the installation systems with thought alone. Lisa saw patterns in network data that even the Kathrani missed. The predecessors called it the awakening. Genetic memory and potential preserved through 50,000 years of evolution, finally activated. Not every human could access it, but those who could became bridges between past and future. 6 months after finding the installation, the Galactic Council met again. This time the tone was different. Ambassador Claire stood before them with Helen at her side. The predecessors have given us knowledge and time and responsibility, she said. The network that stabilizes reality is failing, and we must find a permanent solution together. This is not a human problem alone. Every species benefits from stable reality, and every civilization has a stake in fixing this. The lead predecessor manifested through the installation's systems its presence, B. Out physical and digital. We propose the predecessor legacy project, it said. A cooperative effort involving all willing species dedicated to understanding and replacing the network with something sustainable. The vote was unanimous. Self-interest and common good aligned perfectly, for perhaps the first time in galactic history. That night, Helen returned to the installation and found the first predecessor standing before the great node. "You seem troubled," she said. "I am hopeful," it replied. "A strange feeling after so long. We sacrificed everything because we saw no other choice. But watching humanity work alongside species we never imagined, I begin to believe the future might be brighter than our past." Helen looked at the artifact, still in her hands. "It called me Maker when it first activated," she said. "I never understood why." The predecessor smiled, and the expression was genuinely human. "Because that is what you are," it said. "We were the first makers building civilization from nothing, but we failed to build something lasting. You have the chance to do better, to create not just technology or civilizations, but a future that does not require sacrifice, that does not demand anyone spend eternity holding back the void alone." It placed a hand on her shoulder, and Helen felt the weight of 50,000 years of loneliness and duty and hope. "Welcome back, Maker," it said. "Not to what we were, but to what you can become. Build us a future worth the price we paid." Helen looked at the humans and aliens working together throughout the installation. The task was enormous, perhaps impossible. But humanity had never been good at accepting impossible. "We will try," she said. "That is what we do best." The predecessor's smile widened. "I know," it said. "That is why we chose Earth. That is why we scattered ourselves and waited. We knew stubborn children who refused to give up would find our legacy and make it into something better." Above them, the node pulsed with steady light, holding reality together for another day, another year, another millennium if needed. But now, for the first time in 50,000 years, it did not have to bear that burden alone. The makers had returned, and they were ready to build something that would last.